It's 11 o'clock. We've hit the top of the hour, so I guess we should begin. So with that, I will say hello and welcome to the third in a series of educational webinars. This one's titled Beyond the RADV Checklist, Short-Term Survival and Long-Term Revenue Protection. I'm 𝘀cie. I'm the owner and CEO of CV Strategic Marketing Solutions, and I'm a strategic marketing consultant for RAAPID. I'm joined today by Wynda Clayton. She is a leading expert in RADV audit strategy and Medicare risk adjustment. She's also the director of risk adjustment and coding and compliance for RAAPID. And today's session is exactly what the title says. We're going further than the checklist, which is usually the basics that everyone has. You know, as RADV is evolving, so must we, and this webinar is going to help you get from a more reactive state to a more strategic state. So whether you're in coding or your executive leadership, this webinar is for you, because this webinar is about preparing your teams not just to survive audits, but to use them as revenue integrity leverage, i.e. revenue protection. But before I pass on the baton to Wynda, I just want to say a couple of housekeeping notes. One is that we are going to get this, if you're registered for this presentation, you're going to get a copy of it. You're going to get a copy of the recording and probably a PDF of the presentation. One of the things we're doing is we're going to be taking polls throughout this webinar, and I'm going to ask if you could please engage, because it's going to give us insight as to where you are in the RADV space, and also gives Wynda good information as she's presenting. And finally, I want you to think about that as Wynda's giving the presentation, questions are going to pop up. So instead of holding on to them, because we are going to do a Q&A at the end, just go ahead and write your question down in the Q&A section. And so this way you won't forget them, and then we'll definitely get to them at the end. And if we can't get to them, we will send them post webinar. So with that, I'll pass it to Wynda.
All right, thanks, Kat. So again, I want to also say welcome to everyone, and thank you for just taking the time today to attend this webinar. So, you know, if you're here, I would say that you're likely wrestling with the fundamental shift that RADV is no longer just a compliance requirement, but that it's a strategic inflection point. That's kind of where we are right now. What was once that back office function, it's now going to directly impact the boardroom decisions. So your roadmap for today, here's what we're going to be going over. We're going to start with why RADV audits are now a strategic imperative. Then we're going to dive into what changed, what kind of changes just happened here in 2025. We're then going to talk about the short-term survival tactics, the long-term protection strategies, and then we're going to look at a real-world case study. We'll then wrap all of this up with a discussion, and then we'll give you some actionable takeaways. So
let's share the slides and let's get started.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to slide 3.
Okay, so one of the things I'm just going to also just set the stakes here is just remember that CMS's audit model is expanding. It's not contracting. And with the extrapolations that are now being applied to all of the contracts annually, the cost of misalignment isn't just compliance, but it's revenue leakage. We have reputational risk that's going to be happening, as well as there's missed opportunities for documentation defensibility.
Awesome. Next slide. Okay, I did say we were going to have polls, so here's poll number 1. Please engage in the poll. No one's going to know you. They're all anonymous, but it really is going to help everyone get a sense of where we are. So the question is, how confident are you in your organization's current RADV, in your organization's RADV audit readiness. Wanda, any thoughts while folks are quickly taking the poll?
You know, whether you're confident or you're concerned, today's session is just going to give you those tools to strengthen your position. So keep in mind that today is not about scaring you. We don't want to scare you with the CMS updates or drown you in all of those regulatory jargons. It's just about helping you. We want to help you to build that defendable strategy. We'll be unpacking those survival tactics for today. But most importantly, we're going to explore the frameworks for long-term revenue protection that integrates the compliance, coding, and also those clinical realities.
Awesome. Let's see those results. So we have somewhat, 21% somewhat confident, 50% neutral, 14% not confident, and 14% unsure. So what does this kind of tell you real quick, Wanda?
Well, it looks like since a lot of people are neutral, I'm looking at that this is pretty good as far as being able to go through this webinar today. You're going to really learn some things because you have people here who are saying, well, I'm unsure. You have some that are not confident, some that are somewhat confident, but we got a lot of people who are sitting here neutral. So again,
Awesome.
RADV shouldn't just live only in your compliance officer, but it should live in your revenue strategy because a checklist, it's not going to save you, but a plan just might.
Awesome. Next slide.
All right, so now we're going to jump in and just kind of talk about what has actually changed in 2025. We know that CMS has shifted from that episodic audit to a systematic surveillance. Annual audits, larger samples, AI-assisted reviews, this is all a new era, but plans must evolve from being reactive compliance to being proactive defensibility. So let's begin with the why. CMS has made radical changes this year. We have annual audits from MA contracts, you have your chart samples jump into 200, and we have coders that are being supported by AI. These just aren't just numbers, they're signals. Signals that the era of passive compliance is over. What's being audited? It isn't just documentation. It's the very assumptions behind your revenue projections. So we're not just talking about updates, we're talking about those fundamental changes. RADV audits were once isolated compliance events. They were triggered sporadically and targeted at a subset of MA contracts. But in 2025, that model is actually extinct. Now what we have is we have those changes that we were just talking about. Every Medicare Advantage plan now faces that annual RADV audit. CMS isn't cherry picking the contracts. They're systemizing the revenue, they're systemizing the review across the board. Your revenue cycle is now subject to regular forensic evaluation. We have the chart samples. This increase of the sample size, it has raised the stakes. Statistically, the probability of error discovery has now expanded, and so does the scope of that extrapolation. A single miscoded chart in a 200 chart sample can now actually translate into millions in clawbacks. And those artificial intelligence that we were talking about that CMS is now supporting the coders with, it's now embedded in CMS's audit methodology. That means that there's faster chart reviews, deeper pattern recognition, and we also have fewer documentation inconsistencies that are going to be slipping through. So your coding, it must be able to withstand the machine scrutiny. These aren't just operational tweaks, but they're tectonic shifts. The implication, it's rippling across departments. Your coding team, they need to make sure that they embrace the documentation defensibility, not just completeness. Your finance team, they must recalibrate the risk adjusted forecasting models. And then your provider relations team, they must be able to bridge that clinical documentation practice with the audit standards. So RADV, it's now less than what was coded and more about how well it's defended. Your accuracy is the table, it's the stakes. Audit resilience, it's the new edge.
You know,
So
you
yeah,
might, yeah, you might say, Wanda, that it's like the audit landscape. There was so much disruption, so much change. So with that in mind, I almost want to ask everyone to kind of think about what's the most disrupted RAVV change your team has faced this year. If you could share that in the chat, that'd be great because you look at all these changes, you look at all these things that are happening. This is just a lot of disruption. And I'm just curious to know how it's been on your end. Next slide.
all right, so what we have here is this is just a comparative table that's been put together to show you the pre versus the post for 2025. So this table is telling you the story. It's highlighting the operational shift. RADV audits have matured into the systematic surveillance model, and it now touches every contract every year with extrapolation as the default. So, what used to be episodic and reactive is now predictable. It's expansible. And then also, you have that financially consequential. Financial exposure is no longer theatric. Instead, it's structural. So if your audit strategy hasn't evolved, your revenue will be exposed.
Okay, so
Kat?
it's all
Yep,
about Wanda, it's all about ultimately changing the mindset from an episodic one-off audit thought process to a more systemic surveillance or kind of like future-proofing methodology, correct?
absolutely.
Okay. Next slide, please.
So here it's time to talk about what are some of those short-term survival strategies. But before, and then because we have the short term and we have long term. But before we actually talk about the long term, what we want to do is we want to address talking about survival. So, what can be done right now to reduce those exposures? What can be done are your triage tactics. You're probably asking, what the heck is Wanda talking about? What is this? So, it's actually your close period deletes. This is where it gives you a chance to shave down those possible extrapolations. You have your internal simulations. It's your chart retrieval vendors. And here you need to make sure that they themselves need to be RADV verse, not just HIPAA compliant. And then HIM readiness. With your HIM readiness, provider offices, if you have anybody here that are from provider offices, if you're present, or even if we just have the health plans here, you need to make sure that those provider offices are not just taking their documentations and logging it without making sure it's complete. Um, and and when I say complete, I mean making sure that we have those signatures and not just the signatures, but also making sure that you have the credentials for all of the providers who are signing these chart notes. And then plans, you need to be simulating audits. An example is to make sure that you run like a mock RADV audit. And as you perform those audits of any kind, ask yourself if every signature is legible, or does every record have support for the chronic conditions? Was the condition active on the date of service? In other words, you need to make sure that every record is meet ready. All of this just won't reduce the exposure, but it'll also send that signal to CMS, letting them know that your plan itself is self-correcting. We want to make sure that we're framing for the urgency. You're probably asking, what is the urgency? Because there's really no way the CMS is going to pull this off. They're not going to get all of these years done by next year. But let's be clear. In this climate, inaction is risk. With extrapolation now being applied universally, even the minor documentation gaps can become major revenue threats. That means that the survival in the short term isn't just optional, it's operational necessity. So whether CMS actually gets all of these years done that have been announced or not, keep in mind it's going to happen one day, whether it's today or it's tomorrow. So now, again, keeping in mind the short-term strategies, again, they're not just triage. They're signals. They're signals to CMS to make sure that they know that your plan is being proactive, that you're self-correcting, and you're being transparent. So that exposure matters. When extrapolation disputes reach that legal review. Next slide. So on this slide, it's actually titled Control the Damage Before It Multiplies. And what this is, it's probably hard to see and you probably can't see everything, but when you get a copy of the slide deck, you'll be able to see this better. But what it's doing is it's just a visual that's showing you that if a plan is actually in place, how the damage can be controlled before it actually multiplies. Right, Kat.
Next slide. Ooh, poll number 2. Okay, everyone, please engage. And it's time to take the next poll. There it is. What's the short-term tactics, or what short-term tactics have your team already implemented? So there were 50% of you that were neutral. So that means that maybe you guys have already started something. I'd love to hear what you all are working on right now. Okay, any thoughts, Wanda, while they're quickly filling out this form? All right. So let's go ahead. If you have the results, let's show them real quick. Ooh, okay. Close period deletes, 21%. Internal simulations, only 7%. Vendor validation, 21%. Document audits, 36, and then none yet. What are your quick thoughts on this, Wanda?
Well, good. I'm glad to see as far as documentation audits that's up there. Those deletes are going to make a big difference as well. And we're going to talk more about this as we pivot into the long-term revenue protection.
Yeah, only 7% internal simulation, so that's interesting. Okay, let's
That
go to the next
is,
slide.
yeah. All right. Next slide. I think we lost a slide deck.
Yeah, it looks like we did. That's okay.
All
Maybe
right.
you can
Well,
just
I will
start,
go.
and
Yep,
then the
I will go ahead and
copyright
just
to come.
continue to talk here. So,
Yeah.
the next slide is actually that you're going to see is talking about the long-term revenue protection framework. So we're going to pivot to sustainability here. So RADV needs to be owned by your revenue strategy, not just compliance. And I know you've heard me say this over and over again, and in the last two presentations that we've done where I keep saying it's not a compliance thing. So that just means that embedding defensible documentation practices at the provider level is going to be imperative. You want to have that real-time analytic dashboard. Coding teams, they need to be trained not just on the guidelines, but also on that audit sensitivity. A lot of times I've seen where people think that because that coder knows how the guidelines, they can jump in there and they can do a RADV audit, and that is not so. So again, keep in mind that that coding team needs to be trained on the audit sensitivity. Your goal isn't just to pass the audit, but it's actually to be audit proof in design. That's what your goal is. So short-term survival will actually help you pass an audit, but the long-term strategy is going to help you to disarm it. The key shift here is the ownership. RADV strategy must be embedded into your revenue architecture, not just parked in a compliance silo. Next slide. Now here, what you're seeing is this is a pyramid that's been put together. This is the core components of a resilient framework. It's the way to build for resilience and not just compliance. At the base, you're seeing your provider documentation. At the top, it's the extrapolation mitigation. Each layer here is building resilience, from coder education to real-time dashboards to pre-audit modeling.
You know, Wynda, if you if you were guiding an organization that really didn't have any systems in place and you pulled up this pyramid, what's the one layer if they had nothing else? And of course, it's better to have everything. But where should what should they actually focus on first?
You know, if I was actually guiding an organization and we'll say they're starting from scratch because they have nothing ready to go, the first layer to target without any hesitation would be the provider documentation alignment. That's why when I saw the provider documentation, even in the poll, it was good to see that. So, but why should we start here? We should actually start here because everything else, your coding accuracy, your audit defensibility, extrapolation mitigation, it's all going to depend on the integrity of what's documented at the point of care. If the providers aren't consistently capturing the meat, the support, the criteria there, then even the most sophisticated coding and audit strategies will collapse under scrutiny.
Hmm.
So what this, again, we're looking here at your strategic framing. You can't defend what wasn't documented, and you can't extrapolate revenue from unsupported diagnoses. So provider documentation isn't just the foundation, it's the firewall. Once this layer is solid, you can build upwards your coder education, your HIM simulations, your dashboard and analytics, and also your pre-audit modeling. But without it, you're just following charts and hoping for the best.
That's an awesome answer. Thanks, Wynda. Next slide.
All right, so now we have a case study, and this is the case study that's looking at audit readiness in action. So here you're looking at where an MA plan was faced with a $14 million clawback risk. Through deletes, provider education, and dashboarding, they were able to cut it by 40%. This isn't just a theory, it's execution and also leadership. The case shows that the internal readiness translates into a financial resilience. So let's just kind of set the context here. Let's take RADV out of the abstract and drop it into the real world. Here's the journey of actually a mid-sized Medicare Advantage plan. They were facing a $14 million extrapolation risk, but they turned this readiness into some results. Next slide. This timeline here that you see on this slide actually captures how one plan turned a high-risk audit into a strategic win. So by combining the deletes, the education, and dashboarding, they didn't just survive, but they actually built a defensible framework. And now you can see here that this framework that was built is being ran quarterly. So the baseline here of this scenario is that CMS issued a notice of audit to the plan's largest regional contract. The initial retrospective review showed that there was 17% meet failure rate across the sampled HCCs. And the estimated extrapolation clawback was $14 million. The intervention strategy, the compliance team, they initiated a closed period scrub of the HCC coded without full meat. So all of those HCCs that were coded without full meat in the documentation. And they ended up removing 22% of suspected codes prior to the submission, which actually was significantly reducing the audit exposure. Your clinical leads, they conducted RAPID training, targeting prior care physicians, especially on those high-risk codes like morbid obesity, major depressive disorder, and also your vascular disease. The providers were coached on the chronic condition updates and also on meet refresh strategies. Then there were templates that were embedded into the meet prompts and linked assessments to the problem list. This helped improve the documentation fidelity, and it enabled the coders to be able to validate more effectively. And then with their internal dashboard monitoring, they had a RADV readiness dashboard that tracked the HCC outliers. They also flagged the coding inconsistencies, and they were able to monitor the attestation gaps across the specialties. And then with their outcome that they ended up achieving was that they reduced the clawback back by 40%. CMS acknowledged that the plan's proactive deletes and their documentation improvements actually cut their clawback estimation from about 14 million to about 8.4 million.
That's amazing.
All right. So the takeaway message here with all of this is that audit readiness isn't just about avoiding penalties. Again, it's about protecting the projected revenue with the operational precisions. This case actually proved that the aligned strategy, education, and the analytics, it just didn't help prepare for the audit, but it actually changed the outcome. Kat?
That's awesome. Let's just get to the next slide because I have some questions for you now. All right. So, Wanda, with every, MA, Medicare Advantage contract now auditable, how should, payers and payer provider agreements evolve to define audit responsibilities and protect downstream revenue? How can they put that all together, or what should they be looking at?
This is actually a pivotal question, and it's one that actually demands both legal precision and operational foresight. So, with every Medicare Advantage contract that's now being exposed to the audit risk, payer provider agreements must actually evolve from just being a transactional document into a strategic risk sharing framework. So some of the things that could probably be in those agreements that will make it a resilient agreement is to have those explicit audit clauses. Define who owns the audit response duties. Include the documentation retrieval and those coding validations, as well as the rebuttal drafting. Specify some timeliness for those record submission. We all know that, when it comes down to asking for those chart notes from the provider offices, sometimes we know that they're always busy, but sometimes you just don't get those chart notes in a timely manner. So you need to make sure something is there that that you're going to receive those in a timely manner. Make sure you share the liability language. Move beyond the vague languages in those contracts, and make sure that you put language in the contract that is not so vague. Give them specifics. The documentation standards, training mandates, make sure you're requiring that your providers adhere to the MEET guidelines. Make sure that they are documenting the support for those chronic conditions. And then you need to make sure that you have those data governance and then access rights in your agreement as well. Clarify who controls the source of truth for that encounter data. Ensure that both parties have real-time access when needed. And then revenue protection mechanisms. This is a big one. You need to make sure that you're allowing for contract renegotiation triggers. If the audit outcome is impacting your shared revenue, what happens then? Is the provider going to be responsible for some, or is the health plan just going to take all of the responsibility? And then you need to have that strategic framework, remembering that audit risk is no longer theatrical, but it's contractual. Agreements must evolve from reimbursement mechanics to making sure that you have that audit resilient, those blueprints, because we know that this is one of the most urgent tensions in risk adjustment today. And then balancing the need for that defensible documentation with the reality of provider fatigue is imperative. The answer isn't just more about the checklist or longer templates. It's smarter, more human-centered design. That's what we need to be working on.
That's awesome. I was going to ask about provider fatigue and burnout, and like how do we, help mitigate that, because that's like the area on the that a triangle that you showed, the pyramid, that was so important. We're kind of running out of time. No, we're not really running out of time, but if you could quickly answer your thoughts or provide your thoughts on that, that would be good. And then we'll get to the next slide.
Yeah, so I think it is important that we make sure we balance the thoroughness with burnout, because it's so imperative to make sure that everything is thorough. But yet at the same time, we don't want to have the burnout there for those providers. So maybe we need to shift from volume to intent. We need to make sure we reduce those cognitive loads that are there. We need to have this sustainable clinical education approach, by talking to the physicians and making sure that there is a good communication going back and forth between them, is what we need to do. And I think those are some of the ways we can actually make sure that we're looking at
And would you say that,
balancing.
yeah, and I guess helping them with technology that supports them and that supports the
Yeah,
documentation gathering. But let's go to the
absolutely.
next
Right.
slide. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is our final poll. And if you all could quickly participate, that would be awesome. And it's, what's your top priority in the next 90 days? Because again, remember, it's not if you're going to get audited, it's when. So what's your top priority? Any thoughts while folks are quickly filling that out?
Yeah, so just make sure that as you're answering this question, your answer here should actually guide your next internal meeting. So, and what we're going to do is we're going to, let's turn the insight actually into action.
Awesome. Okay, let's get those results and see. I'm curious. Okay, so we got 14% coder retaining coders, or 43% provider engagement. That's good. Audit simulation, still at 14. Well, it's a little higher here. And documentation review. So what are your thoughts here?
I like this. I like your provider education is what is your top priority for the next 90 days, because as we know, engaging with those providers are imperative. As long as you're engaging with your provider, you can make sure all those things we were talking about, that you can try to lead them, guide them in what their documentation needs to look like. And one of the things, even with that being said, I want to point out is just remember that when you're engaging with those providers, don't try to teach them how to code, because providers are not coders, and that's not what their purpose is and what they're trying to do. What you want to do is you want to guide them and lead them in what their documentation should look like. So please keep that in mind. Don't try to teach them how to code, just teach them how to document, making sure that they have everything in the documentation that is needed so that it can support those conditions. So when you go to capture, or when it's being sent into CMS, you can say this has been supported within the documentation.
That's awesome. Next slide, please. Okay, we've gotten to the Q&A section. So let's see what kind of questions have popped up. Let's see. Oh, I don't see any questions here yet, but I did have a question. Maybe folks can pop in things that they're thinking about. Ooh, what are defensibility protocols? I'm so glad someone asked that, Wanda, because I noticed that on the last poll, no one answered defensibility protocol. So if you could answer this question, that'd be great. What are defensibility protocols?
So those defensibility protocols is where, again, keeping in mind that when we say defensibility, what we're talking about is we want to make sure that there is the meat, the support within your chart notes for all of those conditions. That's what we're looking at when we're looking for defensibility. So we need to make sure that that condition is not just listed in the chart note. We want to make sure that along with that condition being listed in the chart note, that it is showing that it is an active condition. It was active on the date of service, because sometimes I think this is also where the confusion can come in, is you review a chart note, you're looking at it and you're saying, wait a minute, I see meat there, but what is your meat? And is your meat really supporting the condition? Better yet, the question should be is this condition active? Does this meat tell me that the condition is active on the date of the encounter? So we can go into a lot more detail, and maybe defensibility is one of those things we need to note down, that in our next webinar that we can go into that and talk about that further. But that's just to kind of give you an idea there of what we're looking for defensibility.
Oh,
Did
that's
that
good.
help? Did that answer the question?
That's a good question. If it, I believe so, but we'll have to ask the young lady who asked the question. um, but we do have
So,
another question. We do have another question,
okay.
and it's how can AI help improve audit performance?
So your AI, and I'm gonna back up here a little bit. AI can help with that performance, but we've got to make sure that the AI is not given false positives. So you've got to, whatever AI you're using, you need to make sure that that AI is giving you um, complete information, that the AI is giving you accurate information. As long as it's doing all of that, it's going to help, because as a human, as we're looking and we're reading through those documentations, if you remember from the case that I was talking about, one of the things that they found out with the AI is that it brought out things that they themselves miss. And this is something that even as CMS is using AI to help, it's helping them because number one, you have your speed. And with the speed, it's allowing them to get through a lot more charts. But you just have that human to then come back, review, and make sure, validate that everything that the AI has picked up is actually correct. But what also happens is as the human is going through and they're reading through documentations and doing it manually, it's always that chance that they may miss something. They may either miss a condition that's there supported, or maybe they may see the condition there and they just may miss the meat for it, the support for the condition. So AI is going to help with this, and it's going to be able to bring all of this forward, and you'll have more conditions captured more accurately. Um, and the documentation should hopefully the clearness and the conciseness in the documentation should also help with all of this.
There's a couple more questions around AI, but I'm going to move to the bottom one where it says, it seems like false negatives would have a more detrimental impact on the audit for a missed error. Because the
Yes.
first question was, aren't false positives better than false negatives?
Yes, and that is so true. So with that, you are correct. And a lot of times you are going to have a lot of those that pop up. And again, this is why I say look at your AI system. Look at what exactly is being used. One of the things, depending on what everybody is using, I would definitely encourage you to check out RAPID's AI system, what's being used, because here you're going to see where you're going to have more accurate codes that are being captured. You're not going to have where there's going to be a lot of the false negatives, and instead you're going to have a lot of positives that's going to come out. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out if you have not. But have that conversation with your AI vendor and make sure that what you're seeing, what they're doing, that they're actually very accurate where it's going to help you, because otherwise it can hurt you more than it can help.
Awesome. I think that's it. All the questions. So let's get to the next slide. And thank you everyone who asked questions. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. Okay, so let Wanda give the final tips, and then I'll give you some extra information.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure everybody realize, RADV audits, they're not going away. As much as we want them to, they're not. But instead, what's happening is they're actually growing up. The plans that have embedded those audit resilience into the revenue strategy will be the ones that are protecting both margin and reputation. So in those final tips and takeaway, we want you to seek the feedback, reflect on performance, explore those new techniques, set personal goals, iterate and adapt. RADV audits are now universal. They're aggressive, they're extrapolated. Short-term fixes just won't suffice anymore. But the audit readiness must be embedded into a revenue strategy, not treated as a compliance afterthought. And plans that invest in those defensible documentation, your provider education, and your analytics, you will be the best positioned to protect your revenue and your reputation.
Next slide. Oh, exciting. We have another series webinar coming up. It's September 10th. Please make sure to sign up and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, and let us know your thoughts, and give us some ideas about what you're really concerned about. As a reminder, We will be sending everyone a copy of the presentation and some other information, as well as, if you didn't get it last time, we did a survey on RADV. We got the great results and feedback. We'll make sure you get that as well. So again, thank you so much for participating. We really appreciate sharing this information, and thank you, RAPID, for sponsoring it. And like Wanda said, there is great technology related to risk adjustment and RADV that RAPID is constantly improving and putting out there. So make sure you connect with us, go on our website and learn more. We're excited to share the information, and we're excited to be here with you. Any thoughts, Wanda, before we go?
I just want to say thank you again. Remember, we're here to support your journey from the checklist survival to the strategic protection. So thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.